our 2024 season
F1 driver ratings. Happy holiday. Hello everybody and welcome back to the P1 podcast with Matt and Tommy. We are winding down now, but we've got a beefy one for you today. An absolute chocker block all the way through, all 24 Formula One drivers and their average grade across the entire season. No recency bias, Tommy. We're not going with the last 5 races. This is all of them.
Indeed, yeah, we do the average grade across the whole season, which I personally think is the best way to do it, because you do see a lot of recency bias through the end of season and how drives rated, because let's be honest, this season has changed so much that looking back to some of the earlier races and things that have happened just makes me think, oh my word, that feels about 4 years ago now.
Right, let's get into our season driver ratings and begin with my P24. Logan Sargeant with a 3.9 average grade. So Logie Bear obviously lost his seat. So are we surprised to have him all the way down there in my grades? Probably not. His best score was a 7 out of 10 from me at Silverstone, where he finished P11. And that was where he was holding a really strong sort of P22 at the time, maybe 20. Can't remember exactly what he was holding on to there in the championship. But alas, the worst score I gave him was in Canada, where he crashed twice and I gave him a 1. So overall, look, you just look at the numbers. There's not a lot. I mean, I'm looking now. 1, 2, 3, 4 times I gave Sargeant a 5 or above. So a 3.9 average is not surprising.
So my P24 is also Logan Sargeant with an average of 4.0.
No way, Tommy, that's so wild.
I know, crazy. It's like putting on a warm jumper actually to do drive ratings and have Logan Sargeant start the show again. It feels it's a bit nostalgic actually. But yeah, no surprise that my best score was also at the British Grand Prix, because it's the only good race he had the whole season. And was it even good? Because he, I think, he was still, exactly, still behind Albon. So, but yeah, it was a better performance from him. Almost helped him beat Bottas in the championship, but his season was just woeful right from the start. We thought, James Vowles backed him at the end of last year, and he went into the new season and was still very, very poor, crashing a lot of bad grades. My worst ones were not just Canada like you, but Japan as well.
Let's go to P23, Tommy.
P23 is Sergio Perez. And yes, 4.5 average grade is almost like, you're kind of like, wow, but then is it actually going to be a surprise to people? Because his season was so poor, of course. No surprise, his best scores were early in the season in Saudi and Japan. But then from me, he actually got 2 zeros. Canada, where he had a Q1 exit, was slow and crashed in the race. And then Mexico, which, was such a disappointing weekend, to have that in his home Grand Prix where it couldn't have gone any worse, really. And Perez had so many bad performances. So even worse than last year, you look back at his grades, and at the start, 8, 9, 5, 9, 7, 7. But then even earlier, it drops off. Absolutely shocking from Perez.
Shocking indeed. And I also agreed with you, Tommy, because my P23 is also Sergio Perez with the same score as you, a 4.5 average. I also threw a 9 in for Azerbaijan. I felt as though, of course, he was on for a podium, potentially even a P2, until that crash, which was just unlucky, in my opinion, between Sainz and Perez. It was a bizarre one and ended both of their races. But apart from that, Canada and Mexico, as we've mentioned, I gave him a 0. And in the first sort of 4 races, he had an 8, a 9, a 5, a 9, and then even 2 7s. And then from then on, the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 races after that, I didn't give him higher than a 3. no surprise that Perez was down in P23. He's in the spotlight as well, which I don't think helps when it comes to driver ratings. I'm sure the likes of Lance Stroll have had some serious stinkers that have gone under the radar. But like Perez, he's in the drivers' championship winning car. So I think that also doesn't help. But he's had a shocking season, and we still have no news as to who is replacing him, if anybody. So yeah, P23, Perez. Let's go to P22 now. And I spoke about him. It is Lance Stroll with a 4.6 average grade. His best score from me was literally the first race of the season in Bahrain. But also I gave an 8, I think, as well in Canada and also Silverstone. He beat Alonso in Silverstone, and he was just behind Fernando in Bahrain and Canada, which is deemed a decent performance for Lance. And then, of course, I would have given him lower than 0 if possible for Brazil, but that was driving into a gravel off his own accord. And just overall, he's had a very poor season, has Stroll. I felt like maybe, there's this redemption arc when, of course, you rewind to last year and Stroll hurt his wrist and you're like, okay, he's going to bounce back. And everyone was like, oh my God, Lance, wow, look at all the effort you've put in. Maybe and then he drove all right, apart from nearly destroying Fernando. But anyway, after that, you think, okay, maybe he's going to, no. So he showed his love for the sport for that one moment, but then I don't feel like I've really felt it this year.
Certainly not. Yeah, P22 for me is also Lance Stroll with a score of 4.6. Best score was his drive in Canada in his home race and Silverstone, where he beat Alonso, where I gave him an 8. And no surprise, of course, same as you, his worst score was him driving into the gravel on his own at the Brazilian Grand Prix with a 0. The highest grades he always seems to get in drive ratings is if by some miracle, maybe like 3 races a season, he's actually anywhere near Alonso. And as we've shared many stats about Sergio Perez, I saw a slightly bonkers one about Stroll, actually. I don't know who it says more about, Alonso or Stroll. But if Fernando Alonso had basically packed up and gone home after 4 races into the season, they would have scored the same number of points, Stroll and Alonso. He could have taken 20 races off.
Yeah, that says more about Lance Stroll, I would say. Okay, let's go to P21 then.
P21, and it's sad to maybe be talking about him for the last time and giving his grade. It's Zhou Guanyu with a 4.9 out of 10. No surprise, his best score was the epic drive in Qatar, which we gave him a 10 for. Bagged Sauber's only points of the year. Worst score, 2 out of 10 in Netherlands, where he went off. But you look at his grades during the season, and he was just constantly qualifying, wasn't he, in 20th place for so much of the season, and then not really doing much in the race. And I think it was, we were getting frustrated with his scores of just being like, when is this guy actually going to show up? And then Vegas and Qatar, I got an 8 and a 10 from me, which very much is like, why now? Why now when you've been fired? But not a great season from Zhou still.
My P21 is also Zhou Guanyu. I gave him a 5.1 average grade, and that feels good. You went just under 5, which savage. Especially after being given a 10 in Qatar, still didn't manage to get that straight down the middle with you, but just eked over with me. A 9, a 10, and a 6 for the last 3 races of the season for Zhou. He had 3 7s from me across the season, a 9 in Bahrain at the beginning of the year, and the rest was just very poor.
Sorry to jump ahead with a spoiler, but that looking at something that's actually quite funny is the last 3 races then. That is the same as what you gave Max Verstappen. Oh, yeah. Which is quite crazy.
But anyway, thank you, Zhou, for being an integral part of this driver ratings as we now head to P20. And my P20 is Valtteri Bottas with a 5.5 average grade. The best score that I gave him was in China, where he was running in the points, then DNF'd. I gave him a 9 for that. And the worst score, sadly, I mean, that's mad to think that the worst score I gave him the entire year was when he put it into Q3 in Abu Dhabi. Like, the possibilities were endless after Saturday, and Bottas just had an absolute stinker to end the season. Otherwise, maybe he might have finished a little bit higher in this average grading. But alas, Bottas has been sort of hamstrung by the car in a lot of ways. It's been a stinker of a car for most of the year. It's improved towards the end, and we got to see a few glimmers of, oh, okay, all right, I see you, Bottas. And then even Zhou obviously scoring points. But overall, it's very hard to notice them when they're usually at the back. So not surprised to see Bottas in P20.
So P20, I've gone for Valtteri Bottas as well with a score 5.4. And I promise that at some point, our grades do differ. Well, our grades have differed, but in terms of actual drivers and where they are, in this list, their score was China, where when that Sauber was truly woeful. He was running in the points before a very unlucky DNF, and then he might have reached the dizzying heights of maybe P20 in the championship or something like that. And his worst grade, Abu Dhabi, it was just no surprise. A lot of 5 and 6s where we were going, how good is that Sauber really? It's very, very, very difficult to know. And he was beating Zhou until it mattered and there was points on the table, really.
Yeah, absolutely gutting. Let's go to P19.
P19, I have gone for Daniel Ricciardo. He's got an average grade of 5.6. And his best score was an 8 in Miami, where he had that amazing sprint, but not such a great race. Canada, Austria, Belgium, worst score 2 in Saudi, where he ran at the back, spun on his own. And I think that's where kind of so early in the season, it was, oh God, it's Daniel Ricciardo not delivering what we expected. And then, had a really poor season from then on. Just didn't ever hit those heights again of Miami. And I think at the start of the season, Tsunoda scored a lot more points than him, and he was closer to Tsunoda. But unfortunately for him, he was closer to Tsunoda as the season went on, but that's when the RB was basically incapable to score points.
My P19 is also Daniel Ricciardo with a 5.7 average score. It's interesting when you look at the grades that I gave him, and most importantly, I think the start of the year where the hype is real and Ricciardo is there. Is he going to go to Red Bull? And he had a 6, a 3, a 3, and a 3 to start the first 4 races of the season, and almost immediately like, oh no, this is not going the way that we all hoped. Daniel Ricciardo, as he's a well-loved Formula One driver, and you want to see that fairy tale back to Red Bull, but just didn't back the performances up, sadly, at the start of the year. And he had some great moments. I think I similarly graded almost all the ones that you mentioned, and then ended before he got kicked out, sadly for Daniel Ricciardo, as much as we all wanted to see that. And he is all the way down in P19 for both of us. P18. Mine is Esteban Ocon with a 5.9 average score. I think it's similar to Bottas in the sense that I said the car has been, or it definitely was at the beginning of the year especially, just so bad that it's hard to really tell exactly how well Ocon was doing. And of course had a fantastic Brazil, which you can be incredibly proud of, and we thought at one point he was going to win the race. And is he the 18th best driver? I would probably, if I was to do a ranking, I would probably have put him higher. But then this is where it takes out of recency bias, and
you've got to remember as well
how difficult ratings
that
are.
Zeros obviously affect your score quite massively when you're averaging
so I gave
them
him
up.
a 0
for
in
Monaco, of course.
Yeah, because that was on Gasly, wasn't it? And that was unforgivable from Ocon. And that's a very good point actually of dipping his score potentially about 3 or 4 places in this average grade. So P18 for me for Ocon.
P18 for me is Kevin Magnussen with 5.7. And he's another driver where I think with recency bias, people are like, oh, Kevin Magnussen's actually had quite a good season. And of course, at the end, he was very impressive and had some really good performances. But at the start of the season, we were basically saying that he was embarrassing, really. And we're kind of saying that, I'm sure in driver ratings, we were giving him absolutely appalling grades every single week, and it was just getting ridiculous. And at China he had a 4 from me. Then we went into Miami where he got the 0, where he was playing the team game but being absolutely chaotic and just sacrificing his own race, which was quite embarrassing. Then Monaco, another collision, and we're kind of thinking surely this guy's going to get a race ban at this point. Kevin Magnussen's actually looking at his grades. It's the most roller coaster grade. He gets a good grade, then a bad grade, then a good grade, then a bad grade. Magnussen's season at least ended hugely, so much better than it started, which wasn't difficult.
Actual endings, Bottas sent him into the shadow realm, so maybe not the exact ending.
His performances.
Yeah. Let's go to P17 then.
So P17 is Liam Lawson with a score of 5.8. Of course, our first driver that has kind of joined mid-season, so has a much smaller kind of pool of results, if you like. Only 6 results, which in some cases, as you'll see later on, can help your average massively. But with Liam Lawson, he's still all the way down in 17th for me. His best score was at Kota when he returned. I think he did an absolutely fantastic job. But since then, he was incredibly underwhelming. The most poor one was the race in Qatar, where I gave him a 3. I expected more from Lawson after what a brilliant job he did when he was the kind of super sub from Ricciardo previously. He had a much better run last year compared to this year, but still done a decent job.
Considering the experience on his shoulders, I think, we are maybe pretty harsh on him at times.
I think he's a victim of the success that he had last year.
For sure. My P17 is Doohan. It was a 6.0. This is the beauty of including everyone. We've got to include everyone because we've graded everyone at some points. So just kind of ignore it a little bit if you want to. But Doohan got a 6 from me, so he got a P17 because he just drove around and didn't crash. P16. I've gone for, the average grades are Kevin Magnussen with a 6.0 as well. So how it works, if there are the same grades for more than one driver, the best rating will put them into the order. So Kevin Magnussen, of course, had a 10 in Mexico and a 0 in Monaco. So he really has had some polarising grades, as you said earlier, Tommy. It's funny that, despite all of the chatter around K-Mag getting a ban, he's driving so aggressively, dangerously. I don't know if it fully reflects when you look at the numbers. You have these odd moments pick up, but the fact that he's still placed ahead of other drivers is pretty mad, considering the narrative that was happening in that first half of the season. But of course, K-Mag did bounce back really strong. In Kosa, he drove really well, got an 8 from me. Mexico, a 10, as I mentioned. Qatar got a 9 as well. And K-Mag's a great driver, just can also lose his head a little bit.
My P16 is Doohan, and also with 6.0. Of course, he slots into that kind of grade again you mentioned about Ocon. Mine's quite similar. There's a lot of drivers with very close to 6, and Doohan with 1 grade slots him into this kind of part, but he's very, very difficult to judge. Got the 6 because essentially he made no mistakes, but would have been kind of hilarious if he'd have done an unbelievable job, got a 10, and then of course he would have been first.
1 driver ratings.
Yeah,
that would have been quite something. Okay, P15.
P15 is Albon, again with a 6.0 from me as his average over the season. But he's ahead of Doohan because of his best score being a 9, which he got in Monaco, Silverstone, Monza and Azerbaijan. I think Albon had another decent season. Not as good as last year. He had an amazing season last year, but he was against Logan Sargeant. This year wasn't quite as strong, but still put in some great performances. With the 4 9s that I gave him. His worst races were, of course, Circuit of the Americas in Austin, where had an absolute shocker. Collided at the start, went off, out-qualified by Colapinto, and then in Brazil, running so well and looking like he was going to have an unbelievable result in qualifying, and then crashed so hard that he didn't even compete in the race.
My P15 is Liam Lawson with a 6.0 average grade as well. His best score was a 10 in COTA, no surprise. And yeah, I will echo, kind of what we mentioned with your grading, Tommy. I think he has been a victim of his own hype a little bit after coming into the, just out of nowhere and really sort of delivering just straight off the bat, and then maybe having a few average races and getting a poorer grade. Perhaps if he'd come in a bit slower, we would have then been a little bit nicer with our grades. And I think on reflection going into next year, I think Lawson's done an all right job. Has he done enough to get the Red Bull seat? In my opinion, no, not versus Tsunoda. But Red Bull have all the telemetry, all the data, and or they have one piece of telemetry and they just delete Tsunoda's, whatever it might be. But yeah, we'll see. Maybe Lawson will be in a Red Bull next year, and will that be great grades coming his way or not? We will have to find out. P14 then. And it's Alex Albon with a 6.2 average grade. I think he had a good season, but once again, for most of it, he had a teammate that was absolutely not highly rated. And I'm so fascinated to see what Sainz does at Williams next year. Because Albon, in the junior series coming up, all the drivers see Albon as a fantastic talent. And I am really interested to see how Sainz will stack up. Because if Sainz is even a little bit better than Albon, considering how long Alex has been at the team, that won't look good on him. But yeah, this is all ifs, buts and question marks at the moment. What about your P14, Tommy?
P14 for me is Ocon with 6.0. He got the 10 in Brazil, which was an unbelievable drive and just showed that people should not underrate him. The Monaco was the biggest low point by a long way when he crashed into Gasly and basically turned that whole Alpine relationship very sour, it seems, and there was talks of him even getting replaced then and kind of missing the next race, but instead it happened at the end of the season instead for the final race.
Let's go to P13 now.
P13 is Yuki Tsunoda with a 6.6 from me.
It's a big jump now.
We're getting jump. Yeah, exactly. Indeed, yeah, best score. I gave him a 10 in Australia when he was best of the rest and had a brilliant drive. Same with Miami, where he bagged a load of points. Worst score, he got a 4 in China, Canada, Spain, Italy, and Mexico, which kind of shows you that maybe the inconsistencies that Yuki Tsunoda has still, because at the start of the season, when he has a good race, he's getting 9s and 10s and getting what we feel is the absolute maximum out of the car, beating his teammates that he's kind of been against. And at the start of the season, he was finishing best of the rest a lot of the time. But he still is very, still has those moments where he can have like an absolute stinker of a race, and it kind of, rather than just kind of going under the radar and he's finishing 13th or whatever and no one cares, it's kind of worse than that, and something goes wrong or there's an incident or he's crashed or something like that.
My P13, unlucky for some, is also Yuki Tsunoda with a 6.6 average grade. So despite you being a fanboy, Tommy, I've graded him exactly the same across the entire season, which is quite baffling, to be honest, because we never speak about each other's grades before we record any of the episodes. And here we are with the same brain. So that's exciting. But yeah, I went for a 10 in Australia and Japan and gave him a worse score of 3 in Mexico. Yuki's, like, as much as he's got these errors and these inconsistencies occasionally, he's showing enough to get promoted, and he's shown enough to get promoted for quite some time. Like, maybe he'll need a bit of nurturing. Maybe he'll need to rein it back a little bit. But what Formula One teams want, you see a Mercedes with Kimi Antonelli, for example, it's just raw speed. If you've got the raw speed, everything else can fit into place eventually with the right coaching and whatever. So hopefully he'll be rewarded, but let's see. P12 for me, Franco Colapinto 6.8 average grade. He had a best score of 10 in Azerbaijan, where he scored points, of course, and then a 4 in Brazil, where maybe I should have given him a bit slightly harsher grade there, but considering what happened. But either or, it was a crazy race, was Brazil. So Colapinto had a fair amount of time to get used to the car, get used to Formula One. He came in with a bang and left with a sort of just show me out, see you later, take care, quite quiet. When I say quiet, I mean in terms of damage, it wasn't quiet, but in terms
he left
of
with a bang, a literal bang.
A literal bang rather than a wow. That was really good because he got 4.555 as the final 4 races of the year. 9 races Colapinto did. But did he show enough? I think so. 8, 10, 9, 9 in the first 4 races. He needs more time under his belt, for sure. He deserves to be on the grid. He got it. The fact that he had this opportunity out of nowhere and took it with both hands, I commend him. So fingers crossed for 26, I imagine he will be on the grid.
P12 for me is also Colapinto with 6.7 average score. Again, best Azerbaijan, worst Brazil and Qatar. And it was a very, well, in his short 9 races, it was a tale of two halves really, because he started off 8, 10, 9 and 9, and if he'd carried on that, he would literally be the driver of the year with his average scores. But unfortunately for him, I think the crashes that he had in Brazil put a lot of pressure on Williams, and then for him to have that mistake again in Vegas was gutting, because there was so much hype around him. There was talk that Red Bull might even try and poach him and all this kind of stuff. And I do think he has a lot more to show. I think the fact that he came in and did the job that he did a great job. And I think take those couple of crashes that he had out towards the end of the season. I think it's more like where he was finishing in the races and stuff was due to the fact that either he was being taken out by Piastri or Hulkenberg, or the fact that the car was kind of glued together, and we're joking that it's a papier-mâché car or whatever. And
he definitely crashed more than twice, by the way. He crashed twice in Brazil weekend alone. So
okay, 3 crashes.
Just wanted to throw in some facts. You were going to say 9, not 10. So
okay. So his 3 crashes. His 3 crashes, was obviously not good, but I think it's been one of the most kind of wholesome stories of the year when he first came in, and we saw kind of how much sort of the fan base he bought and everything like that was a really cool story for Formula One. And I think that was something that was really awesome. So it's a shame that his career ended, because I'd love to have seen him in Formula One next year, but
his career's ended. Paused. It's paused.
Paused. Sorry. His career.
It's not the end for Colapinto.
In the next. Well, he's not got to drive next year, is what I'm trying to say.
I know what you mean. Yeah, but just in case anyone thinks, he's not left. He's not going to go and study
he's
finance or
banned
business.
From competing in Formula One.
He'll be back. I am very, very sure of that. Let's go to P11 then.
P11 is Fernando Alonso. 6.9. Best score: 9 in Saudi, 9 in Japan, 9 in Canada, 9 in Belgium, 9 in Azerbaijan, 9 in Singapore, 9 in Qatar, which makes me think that, and I'm fully blaming Stroll for this.
I love how it's Stroll's fault, even Alonso's grades.
It's Stroll's fault. That maybe he has some of those could have been 10s, but because of his teammate being so poor, you're kind of like, has he delivered the greatest drive of all time, or has he just put that car where it is? And he's, done a very good job in a lot of races. Of course, his worst ones was Imola for sure, where had an absolutely shocking weekend. But more often than not, he gets the most out of the car, and that makes him incredibly difficult to rate when his teammate is driving into gravel traps on his own. My
P11 is Lewis Hamilton with a 6.8 average grade. This is quite surprising to see him so low down, but also not in some ways. It was definitely not a season to really remember for Hamilton. Outqualified by Russell quite comprehensively this year, and he's just always put himself on the back foot for the races. Sometimes he would deliver some masterclasses. The whole meme of put George Russell on pole, Hamilton on the back, they'll finish together. It happened many times. But Hamilton on a Saturday just kept letting himself down there. And I think that's where he's finished 11th in these driver ratings. And there have been some standouts, of course, this year. And Hamilton hasn't really been one of them apart from obviously Silverstone. Spa was another one where I gave him a couple of 10s, obviously. But he followed that with 3s in Brazil and Qatar. And there were some poor performances there, which you don't expect Lewis Hamilton to deliver. So P11, yeah, it seems harsh. It does feel a little bit harsh, but that's the beauty of driver ratings and the average grades across the whole season. Let's go to P10 then. And mine is Fernando Alonso, who is a top 10 driver in my book, with a 6.9 average grade, which is exactly the same grade as you gave him. And interesting, yes. So I gave him a 9 in a lot of races, but also a 2 in Imola. So there's a couple of pretty poor weekends for Alonso, but overall, it's a top 10. At this point, drivers have performed pretty well. They're just not right at the top and have taken all of the plaudits and the trophies home. But it's been an all right season for Alonso. He's not had the car underneath him and he's not been able to shine as much as we've seen last year in particular. So I'm not surprised. Yeah, I think P10 kind of matches up where he sort of deserves to be.
My P10 is Pierre Gasly with a 6.9. Best score. He's actually got 4 10s. Very impressive. Spain early on in the season. Netherlands, and of course the end to the year he got a 10 in Brazil and Qatar, but also drove brilliant races at the end of the season and got really good grades, which I'm sure has bumped his score up massively, because at the start of the year him and Ocon were both getting kind of 5 and 6s every week, and we're going when Alpine were at the back and we're kind of going, are they getting the most out of it? I think Gasly, don't get me wrong, he has been fantastic and he's deserved the plaudits he's getting at the end of the year, and now he's confident in the car. He deserves those grades, but I've seen some people putting him as high as 5th and 6th, which I think is far too high. When you look at the whole season, it didn't start off as well for him when it was actually Ocon that was the one that was getting the best out of that Alpine. But towards the end of the year, Gasly was just absolutely superb. And since the upgrades, he has been one of the best drivers, has to be said.
Let's go to P9 then.
P9, I have Lewis Hamilton with a score of 7.0. Best score, of course, unsurprisingly, was the 2 wins, actually, Silverstone and Spa. Worst score, Kota. Hamilton's kind of year where he's obviously far down in our grades, and I think for a lot of people as well. I don't think you can say that Hamilton's not had a poor year, but the fact that he still won a couple of races and put in some brilliant drives just shows the kind of the expectation of Hamilton, that even when he's done that, he's still struggling to get into the top 10 drivers of the season. Like you said, it's all qualifying, really. That has been, you can't fault his racecraft, and we've seen that, and we saw exactly what he did in the final race of the season where he came through the field. But so many times his qualifying has just been so poor, and it just puts him on the back foot compared to his teammate, and he has to spend most of the race trying to get through, and then he's run out of laps before he can get a better result.
P9 for me is Pierre Gasly with a 7.0 average grade. Gave him 3 10s across the year. And this is an absolute tale of, I wouldn't say 2 halves, perhaps like the first third really letting him down. 4, 5, 5, 5, 5, 7, 5. And then he went on a run of really good performances, 8, 8, 9 from Monaco to Spain. And then, of course, towards the end of the year as well, Gasly really just flew up the average grades. It's just something clicked with Gasly. Of course, upgrades came to the team. The Alpine did get better, but it feels so long ago now that you think that they were at the back at the beginning of the year. Good to see Gasly up in 9th. Let's go to P8. It's Nico Hulkenberg with a 7.2 average grade. I think a great season for Hulkenberg. I scored him a 10 in Austria, Silverstone and Vegas, all big points finishes. Sadly, no podiums just yet. A worse score of a 3 in Italy, where he finished 17th when K-Mag was cooking. And then, of course, in Brazil as well, where we had to give him a 3, but also it was quite unlucky in how Hulkenberg's race ended, sadly. So Hulk next year, I hope it's not a terrible car, because he's off the back of a great season, and that's why he's P8.
P8 for me is also Nico Hulkenberg with a score of 7.0. He's put in some amazing drives, and it's been good to see, because last year, of course, he had those amazing qualifying performances, and the Haas was just unable to deliver anything in the races. But now they've kind of sorted that problem out. Hulkenberg has had so many races where he's delivered big points finishes for Haas. You look at his results from the season, and he's had loads of 11th places as well. So yeah, he's got a lot out of that car for most weekends, and now goes to Sauber. So good luck with that. Hopefully, Audi are better for him.
Okay, let's go to P7 then.
My P7 is George Russell with a score of 7.5. His best score, of course, was Austria, where he inherited a win, but I think still drove superbly well. Belgium, of course, he got disqualified, but like we said at the time, he was going to win that race. Couldn't give him anything other than a 10. And Vegas brilliantly won as well. The worst grade I gave him was actually a 4 in Australia, where he crashed on his own. But of course, that was Fernando Alonso's fault, according to the FI stewards. George Russell's had a good season. The fact that he's, to be against Lewis Hamilton and how he's delivered against him under, could have been huge pressure. The fact that he's gone alongside him. We saw what happened with Bottas. And, it has to be said, after last season was quite a worry of how his season went. This year he's absolutely turned it around. And I think he would have, couldn't believed to have ended up with a couple of victories, to be honest, based on how Merc have been since those new regs coming in.
P7 for me is Oscar Piastri with a 7.6 overall grade. Might come as a bit of a surprise to some people. Of course, Piastri has had a great season. Of course, he's a race winner, a multiple race winner now. For me, he's kind of been let down, I think. I say let down. He scored 4 7s out of the first 5 races for me. And then towards the end of the year as well, it wasn't a strong one. It's not surprising to me, of course, like if I go to my 4th place at 7.7, so it's literally 0.1 of a grade separating P7 all the way to P4. So it is very close indeed. I think Oscar can be incredibly proud of his progress that he's making. It's his end of his 2nd season, and he was in the Constructors' Championship winning car. He got a couple of wins under his belt. He's still got to improve his race pace over the course of a whole season. He had sort of a stint where he went, okay, oh my God, he's fixed it. That's it. Oscar now knows tyres. We're all good. But then towards the end of the year, his pace sort of dropped off a little bit compared to Lando. And Oscar, as much as he's known as a one-lap, he lost 24 to Lando this year in qualifying. So as much as he might have been close in qualifying and he still isn't getting knocked out in Q2 or Q3, perhaps that's where he'll sort of edge into the sort of top 3, top 4 for next year if he can even that qualifying head-to-head out against Lando.
It's interesting actually to look back on we did obviously our mid-season driver ratings where we graded them, and Oscar, was 3rd in your mid-season and 2nd in mine, and kind of shows that he's had a bit more, despite getting that obviously the win in Azerbaijan. There's been too many races where he has been slower than Lando, hasn't it? So it's interesting to see how much that's kind of dropped down, and the kind of average has kind of worked out where he's kind of slipped down a bit more after starting so strong.
P6 for me, also with a 7.6, is Carlos Sainz, who had a 10 out of 10, of course, for Australia, Mexico and Abu Dhabi. Got 2 wins out of those, of course. And then a 2 out of 10 for me for Brazil, where he crashed out on his own. But overall, I think Sainz, he had a great season. He's just one of those drivers that just, from FP1, it's clicked with him. And he is on the pace, if not quicker than Charles Leclerc. Over the course of the whole season, Charles has had the upper hand, and I think the stats very much back that up in the head-to-head. But Sainz is a great driver, and Charles Leclerc, in my opinion, is one of the best drivers on the grid. So for Sainz to be close is not something to be slandered, it's something to still be celebrated, because I think Sainz has done a great job, and that's why he's 6th in my overall standings and tied with 2 other drivers on that score. So overall, Sainz, of course, gutting to see him go to Williams, but I think he's had a good 2024. A great 2024.
6th for me, Ollie Bearman, 7.7. Now, of course, Ollie Bearman only doing 3 races, and of course, we know that he's been the super sub, has skewed his grading quite significantly. The fact that he doesn't have, like we mentioned with Ocon, for example, that a 0 plummets your score so much, and when you're having an average over 24 races and you have 3 good races, then of course your grade's going to be incredibly high. So I think it's fair. sorry, 2 good races and a poor race, but I think it. Bearman is not the 6th best driver of the year, but on average, of course, that's where he's been. And I think it just shows that Bearman's come in and done a very good job. He's been a sub for 2 different teams. Saudi was absolutely brilliant for him to come in so late, and a track like Saudi as well, for him to deliver that drive. The pressure of Ferrari to score the points that he did and help them in that Constructors' Championship fight and bag some Constructors' points for them has to be massively commended. Bearman's done a brilliant job and absolutely deserves to be on the grid next year, just from those performances that he's had.
Cool, let's go to P5 then.
P5, Carlos Sainz, 7.7 out of 10. His best scores were, of course, Australia and Mexico, his victories. But he has had some bad races as well. Canada and Brazil, where he's crashed out. And Carlos, I think, is a brilliant teammate to Charles Leclerc. He's not quicker than him over a season, but he is there to bag that team so many points in the Constructors' Championship. And it was a good season from Sainz, and I have to say, it ended the season really strongly as well, which is obviously a nice thing when I think he soaked it in, didn't he, and thought, this might be the last time that I'm driving for this legendary team, or doesn't know when he's going to win again. So, of course, Mexico was a big moment for him and meant a lot to him.
Okay, let's go to my P5. George Russell, 7.6 again. Average grade over the season. My best scores for him, 10 in Austria, Belgium and Las Vegas, and a 4 out of 10 for Italy, where he was way off of Hamilton in P7. But overall, I think Russell's had a brilliant season. He has, especially in qualifying. What he potentially lacks slightly in race pace, he makes up for on a Saturday. He's super, Mr. Saturday and all of that banter from Williams. It translates into the Mercedes car as well, and he kind of goes about it. You have, of course, a lot of Hamilton fans defending Hamilton, and look, Lewis has had his own struggles, absolutely, whether it's with the car, whatever it might be, but that shouldn't take away from what Russell has achieved this year. And Russell, he'll be taking over the team leader role next year, going up against Kimi Antonelli. I fully expect him to beat Antonelli quite comprehensively next year. And he's had a very good season to give him some momentum into 2025. So congrats, George. Let's go to P4, where I went for Ollie Bearman, 7.7 average grade. And I went for it over the course of the whole season.
Yeah.
Ollie Bearman, 7.7 average grade. I gave him a 10 in Saudi, a 5 in Brazil. Of course, there's 3 grades. So Ollie Bearman's chilling in P4. He shouldn't be there. You know, what's a polar bear doing and whatever.
Polar
Bearman. That's why it went into my head. That's really okay. Wow, I wondered why that meme was in my head. But yes, Bearman P4. I think when he actually isn't a super sub, I genuinely believe he is a star of the future for sure. And I firmly believe that Bearman is going to be a really, really fascinating driver to see how he progresses. So he doesn't deserve to be in P4, but that's the way the averages work. So well done, Bearman.
P4, I've got Oscar Piastri with a 7.7. Again, I mean, exactly the same grade as Sainz. I think if I was, of course, doing it myself, I'd have put Sainz ahead of Piastri over the year, but that's how it's worked out with basically the grades that I've given him, and I think he's got more 9s than Sainz. Piastri gave him a 10. Miami, Hungary, Azerbaijan, we drove superbly. Worst score, 4 in Mexico, where he was just completely off the pace. The end of the year hasn't been as good as the start. He's still in his second season and has drove incredibly well to get the victories that he's had. But I do think there's more from him that we will see next year. It's a good season from Piastri.
Right, podium time, Tommy.
First spot on the podium, P3. I have Lando Norris with a score of 8 out of 10 average for the whole season. No surprise, his 10s were Miami, Netherlands, Singapore, Abu Dhabi, all his victories. Worst score was a 5 in Belgium, Brazil, Qatar, where of course he's made mistakes. I think Lando's season will always, it will be looked back on as what might have been with the Drivers' Championship, of course, but he has been, in my opinion, so unfairly criticised in terms of like his pace, and you can't put him any lower than a top 3 driver this season with how he's done. At the end of the day, yes, he's made mistakes under pressure and should have won the Drivers' Championship, in my opinion, in that McLaren. But the reason he should have won it is because he has the pace to do it, and that's on him and his ability himself and the speed that he has to do it. Because of course, he's finished a long way ahead of Piastri in the end, and it's just that unfortunately for him, the mistakes have cost him. But it's still a fantastic season, and to think that Lando hadn't won a race before coming into the season, wouldn't have expected to be in this championship fight, of course. And he's done a brilliant job.
My P3, Charles Leclerc, 8.1 average grade. And you call me the Leclerc fanboy on this podcast. Charles, of course, another fantastic season. Absolutely a top 3 driver, just narrowly missing out on runner-up in the Drivers' Championship, nearly getting Ferrari the Constructors as well, just with the consistency with both Sainz and Leclerc. They were just always there, scoring points, even if the car wasn't fastest at many times this year for Ferrari. But of course, he gets a 10 in Monaco, Netherlands, Italy, and COTA, and a worse score of 4 in Silverstone. I think on reflection, he definitely deserved a 10 in Belgium as well. So maybe he would have beaten Norris, who knows. I am very happy with how Charles Leclerc's performed this year. And if Ferrari just a couple of tweaks, get a couple more tenths a lap, we'll be cooking. And I'm ready to see it. But yeah, Charles, P3, and that's where he finished in the drivers as well. P2, Lando Norris with an 8.2 average grade, so just 0.1 ahead of Charles Leclerc for me. And Norris, of course, getting 10s, Miami, Netherlands, Singapore, and Abu Dhabi. And then 6s in Belgium, Brazil, and Qatar. Yes, he has been criticised, but that's what happens when you're fighting for a world championship. The cameras are on you, the focus is on you, everybody is watching the Verstappen versus Norris battle. And Norris is the one that gave us any hope of a championship fight. So that's why he's P2. And overall, Lando learned a lot this year. And I even seeing the average grades, everyone's saying, he made mistakes. I still think he was the second best driver comparable to Charles Leclerc, maybe third. Those two, both deserving P2 in my opinion. But Lando, he's going to learn. He's going to learn more for sure. I'm convinced of it. He has still got the upper hand over Piastri. How long for? We'll see, because Oscar's, of course, only had 2 seasons. But for now, 8.2, second place. Congratulations, Lando. You probably don't care because it's second and not first, but well done anyway.
P2, I've got Charles Leclerc with a grade of 8.1. So again, just 0.1 for me in it between P3 and P2. Very close. Charles got a 10 for his victories in Monaco, Italy and Kota, but I also gave him a 10 at Spa and also Zandvoort, where I think he basically, in my opinion, got the absolute maximum out of that car. And that's something that Charles Leclerc, I think until actually quite late into the season, where people have maybe realised just how good of a job Charles Leclerc's done, and the consistency that he's delivered. You know, if you take out that horrible run in the middle, yeah, he was so consistent at the start. His consistency at the end was brilliant, and he was the one that capitalised a lot when, Monza's a great example. You know, one of the drives of the year for sure, where he's capitalised when McLaren should have been winning that race. And I think it's only kind of taken to the end of the season where I think a lot of people have stood up and gone, oh yeah. The people that aren't doing average grades, for example, have gone, oh yeah, Charles actually had a really good year, I think, with how close he actually ended up finishing to Norris in that championship in the end anyway.
Right, Tommy, hit us with your P1. I wonder who it might be.
P1 is Max Verstappen, 8.6 average score. So quite the jump up. I don't think this one is difficult to decide. Whoever you support and whoever you think, I think Verstappen's undoubtedly been the driver of the year. You know, he's won the championship in difficult circumstances. Of course, he had the car at the start of the year to dominate those few races, but when he had to dig deep and deliver, consistency when the car wasn't there, some of those races he was driving the third or fourth best car and he was still bagging amazing points. And then the drive in Brazil is something that will be remembered forever and ever in Formula One. From me, he got a 10 in Bahrain, Saudi, Japan, China, Imola, Canada, Spain, Singapore, Brazil, and Qatar. But yeah, his worst scores were Mexico and Abu Dhabi. But yeah, an unbelievable season from Max Verstappen to win the championship by that many points in the end, when he had the car that he had for much of the season. And of course, I know Perez has done badly, but he's one of the drivers that's you never see a guy winning the world championship when they're third in the constructors. So amazing from Max to deliver the season he's had.
And my P1 is also Max Verstappen. He pretty much wrapped up this season from Canada, I would say, in terms of the driver ratings, because he had scored 7 10 out of 10s at that point. So even despite a few very cheeky dive bombs, to put it lightly, and finishing off the season with a 6 out of 10, he still, for me, beat Norris by 0.3 of an average grade, which is a lot over the course of a 24 race calendar. But Max Verstappen, he's just delivered. And it's been a season that's even more impressive in some ways than last year, in the way that he has driven around a car that was an S-Box for a lot of it. And not surprised. I wouldn't change it, even if I had access to just doing it right now. Max Verstappen was the driver of the season, and he's also the champion. So it kind of clocks and works out. So there you go. The Beefy Boy is done. The podcast of the average driver grades across the whole season, done and dusted. Tommy, if you were to choose one driver to pick to change their position, who would it be? That's your final thought. Yeah, I've thrown that to you out of nowhere. You didn't know that was coming. Let's see who you're going to go for.
I'd put Sainz. In P4. I think he was the fourth best this season, in my opinion.
Okay, for me, I would put Ocon from 18th all the way to about 14th or something. I don't think he deserved to be that low down, but as I say, it was literally 0.1 of a grade separating all of those drivers. And
keeping the goat Ollie Bearman. P4, of course.
Obviously. That's harsh to downgrade him. Imagine. That's the one I'd change as the silly 3 driver grades. But anyway. Okay, thank you, everybody. We'll see you very soon for another podcast. But that pretty much wraps up all of our review stuff now, doesn't it?
It does. I think this is the last, could well be the last podcast
of the year.
Christmas.
Or Christmas.
Or the year, yeah. So,
well, last podcast, maybe we've got another video coming out of highlights and stuff. Thank you, everybody, for getting involved in driver ratings across the year when you do the fan stuff as well. And we will see you next time. Lots of love. Take care. Sweet dreams. Adios. Goodbye.
Goodbye.